Time and time again, Deleuze and Guattari seem the most apt thinkers to go to in terms of diagnosing our current social situation. And in the wake of the 2024 US presidential election being won by Donald Trump, it's brought a resurgence of discussions surrounding fascism and state control. And this is a topic that's discussed in detail in Deleuze and Guattari's work, especially in their first work they did together, Anti-Oedipus, written in 1968, coincidentally the same year of the May 68 riots, which were over similar concerns. And one of the things that's very central to Deleuze and Guattari's theory is the intersection between psychoanalysis and its discussion of desire, wish fulfillment, fantasy, and things like that, and more general social theory coming out of, for example, Foucault, who's doing his discourse analyses. These are brought together in Deleuze and Guattari's work in a very interesting way that I think you might find helpful in terms of thinking about how desire plays itself out in the social realm. And they're going to give us a slightly controversial thesis regarding fascism and regarding its success in many historical moments, which is that in some sense, the society desires fascism. Now, Deleuze and Guattari are concerned with the way that norms get produced. And they really want to focus on that aspect of production, the way in which contingent historical and social circumstances allow for the development of certain ways of being, certain things that we take for granted and that are being undermined by, for example, the genealogical method of Nietzsche or Foucault, where we examine the historical contingencies that allow for basic concepts to be developed and altered as tools for control. And Deleuze and Guattari mention in a passage that I'd like to discuss that social production is purely and simply desiring production itself under determinate conditions. Now, what the heck does that mean? Now, I've done lectures on desiring production before, but in its most basic sense, desiring production is the idea that what makes things be is the way that they do. The things that they are engaged in actively doing. And the chief method of this doing for anything is desire. Because desire, think about the way that desires work in your head. They propel you towards some end by making you actually do something, by making you not content with what you're doing right now, or in fact have the potential to make you content with the struggle to go out and get something. And this is what societies are trying to do. Read Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Aquinas, Augustine, any of these people who say anything at all about social and political theory. The reason that societies get together is because they need to fulfill some kind of need that cannot be fulfilled individually. And there's a difference here between need and desire, because need is something very material, very rational, whereas desire is not necessarily rational. You can't always pin down why it is that you desire something. And this is the profoundly irrational nature of the socius for Deleuze and Guattari. The social production that creates norms, standards for ways of being, is irrational and operates based on desire. They say, we maintain that the social field is immediately invested by desire, that it is the historically determined product of desire, and that libido has no need of any mediation or sublimation, any psychic operation, any transformation, in order to invade and invest the productive forces and the relations of production. There is only desire and the social and nothing else. In other words, all we need to explain the way we are and the history that allows us to get from that point where we have been to where we are now is to look at the way that desire is invested in the social sphere. The way in which there is a sort of unmediated way in which desire expresses itself en masse in the social sphere. And this is the passage that I want to focus on in this lecture. Even the most repressive and the most deadly forms of social reproduction are produced by desire within the organization that is the consequence of such production under various conditions that we must analyze. In other words, we got to figure out the conditions which allow for the production of certain social products. That is why the fundamental problem of political philosophy is still precisely the one that Spinoza saw so clearly and that Wilhelm Reich discovered. Why do men fight for their servitude as stubbornly as though it were their salvation? How can people possibly reach the point of shouting, "More taxes, less bread"? As Reich remarks, the astonishing thing is not that some people steal, or that others occasionally go out on strike, but rather that all those who are starving do not steal as a regular practice, and all those who are exploited are not continually out on strike. After centuries of exploitation, why do people still tolerate being humiliated and enslaved? To such a point, indeed, that they actually want humiliation and slavery, not only for others, but for themselves. Reich is at his profoundest as a thinker when he refuses to accept ignorance or illusion on the part of the masses as an explanation for fascism, and demands an explanation that will take their desires into account. An explanation formulated in terms of desire. No, they say, the masses were not innocent dupes. At a certain point, under a certain set of conditions, they wanted fascism. And it is this perversion of the desire of the masses that needs to be accounted for. In other words, we tend to look at fascism and say, for example, in the case of Nazi Germany, oh, if only the German populace knew what would happen in the future, they wouldn't vote Hitler in. But Deleuze and Guattari want to push back on this a little bit because they think that it underwrites and underestimates the extent to which people make profoundly mad decisions through rational terms. They want to look at fascism as a historical development which allows for the socialists to continue with certain norms past a point that they might otherwise be called into question, to such an extent that in fact people will desire their servitude, as stubborn as anyone might. And what's really going on here is this is what society does. It takes certain forms of desires and organizes them. And this is a technical term for Deleuze and Guattari, which is to say made into an organ. And an organ is something that takes in inputs and gives out set outputs. And if that input condition is not met, then the output condition is not met either. This is the definition of a machine for Deleuze and Guattari, coincidentally enough. So when they talk about, for example, the body without organs, they're talking about a way of looking at society that doesn't consider these organs as absolute. It views them instead as metastable states, just as states and societies are. They are temporary ways in which there is a calcification of the social milieu, some way in which desire can streamline the way in which it produces things over time. And in fact, this is exactly what we're seeing today with the resurgence of populism, which is just a rebranded fascism as far as I'm concerned, with the Trump presidency. Now what's going on here? Because when Trump got elected for his second time, not just me, was very confused, very confounded and jaded by the way that our socio-political system works here in the States. Well, we need to think about, why do people want Trump? What do people see in him that is some sort of fulfillment, not just of a need, but of a desire to be something more, to create some sort of product? Because Deleuze and Guattari recognize that fascism does have some productive capacity. It seeks to deliver a product of some kind. It seeks to give the master race, the pure country, the morally upright citizen, the benevolent leader, etc. It plays into certain generalities which we could certainly argue do not exist in the absolute sense, but they are created in the relative sense to such a point that people can still tolerate being humiliated and enslaved. Think about what Trump stands for. Trump stands for the strong man who's going to come in and get things done. He represents the charismatic outsider who is not marred by politics but is a businessman who knows the way that things really work and isn't going to get concerned with petty squabbles. Now, we must realize that all of these are farces. In fact, no one knows how to get into a political squabble like Trump. No one knows how to get into trouble like Trump in terms of business or in terms of politics. But this is the point, that it is a smokescreen that amalgamates the norms and indeed the contradictions in society and tries to create something pell-mell, some sort of hodgepodge that is capable of at least temporarily reconciling the contradictions of society such that they do not fold in among themselves. To such a point that people actually want their humiliation and slavery, and this is the real part that needs to be explained more. When we say that they actually want humiliation and slavery not only for others but for themselves, what's going on here is Deleuze and Guattari are profoundly reinterpreting what it means to want. Because if you look at a psychoanalyst like Freud or Lacan, there is an idea that there are certain things that every person wants. Think of, for example, the Oedipus complex for Freud. Every boy secretly wants to kill his father and have sex with his mother. This is some sort of primordial want that Freud goes to all sorts of lengths to try to justify. But the idea is that the Oedipus complex is the structural mark on the human unconscious that testifies to the fact that this tendency, and in fact this natural state, exists a priori. That this is the way humans are, is to be marred by certain neuroses and problems concerning the family and the self. And these are going to play out in certain determinate ways. This is the backbone for Freud's theory. But Deleuze and Guattari think that there's a problem here, which is, of course, how do we say that the Oedipus complex exists a priori? Well, we have to suppose some sort of omniscient perspective from which the analyst comes to the analysand and tells them what they want. And Deleuze and Guattari say that, in fact, really Freud just wants to tell people what they want. He wants them to want something. So, in fact, for Deleuze and Guattari, psychoanalysis has a lot more to do with what the analyst wants than what the analysand wants. And as such, they want to do away with this notion that there are some things that one really wants and some things that it only appears that one wants. That, for example, say the boy loves his father. Well, Freud is going to try that, no, actually, really deep down, you want to hate your father. You want to kill him. You want to usurp him and take his place in the familial pyramid or whatever. Deleuze and Guattari totally reject this. So when they talk about wanting humiliation and slavery not only for others but for themselves, the idea is that there is no peeking behind the curtain to see what people really want or indeed what societies really want. All we can see and all there is the way that society actually manifests itself, actually enacts its own identity through its projection into the future via its ideals that tells us what it is, what it wants, what it desires. So, when Hitler comes along and he promises to fix the economy, to bring back some sort of solid ground to what it means to be a German person, when he promises world domination, respect, all of these sorts of things, we can understand that all of these are things that people want. People want solidity of their identity. They want prestige and honor. They want personal success. They want the flourishing of their society. All of this fascist rhetoric can be dressed in things that people actually do want in their daily lives. And as such, it's very reasonable to imagine how someone could be duped into fascism if you really understand the historical situation of what was going on in Germany in the 30s and 40s, for example. As such, Deleuze and Guattari want to maintain that when we treat the masses as innocent dupes, we underestimate the force of fascism and we underestimate the ways in which it works. And in fact, it creates a defense for fascism, saying that, oh, if people really knew, then they wouldn't choose it. No. What if, in fact, the real flair of fascism, the way that it keeps working, and the reason that we see it experiencing a resurgence in American populism vis-a-vis Trump, this is because fascism works, in a sense. Because it appeals to desires, it appeals to easy ways out of hard situations. At a certain point, under a certain set of conditions, the American people want Trump. The popular vote testifies to that. And as hard as that is to believe, that is Deleuze and Guattari's point, that if we want to understand some possible solution, some way in which we call into question, for example, the position and ideal that Trump stands for, that in fact he doesn't stand for the common people. He himself is a rich man who vies for other rich men, for corporations, for the state over against the working people. If we want to be able to dissolve that sort of ideal, we have to understand the role that fascism plays in the way that it actually works on desire, both in an eminently personal sense and an eminently social sense. That being said, that's it for this lecture. I hope it's provided something of substance. You can check out any of my other lectures I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, post-colonial studies, and other literature. You can also become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom, which you can tailor to your needs. Maybe you need help with some reading or talking about some philosophical problem, etc. Feel free to also donate via Super Thanks if you just want to do a one-time donation, because I appreciate anything that anyone likes to give, but no pressure. That's it for this lecture, and I will see you in another one.